Memorial Day 2015, the nation honors its war dead while it fights to maintain freedom against terrorism and tyranny. This is Special Report. Good evening, I'm Shannon Bremen for Brett Baer. On this Memorial Day, the country honors the more than 1.25 million Americans who have given their lives in military service. But threats to the U.S. still abound, from the Middle East to Asia to right here in the homeland. And there is growing rancor about what the nation is and should be doing about them. Correspondent Kevin Corke begins our coverage tonight from the White House.
It's the first Memorial Day in 14 years without U.S. forces engaged in a major ground war. In marking the occasion, President Obama laid a wreath at the Tomb of the Unknowns. The president later told a gathering at Arlington National Cemetery that America can never fully repay the debt to those who made the ultimate sacrifice.
By remaining a nation worthy of their sacrifice. By living our own lives the way the fallen lived theirs. A testament that greater love has no other than this, than to lay down your life for your friends.
The president's remarks come as the sacrifice in Iraq continues. Despite U.S. training and American air support, Iraqi security forces were routed at Ramadi by ISIS more than a week ago. A stunning victory for insurgents in a place where dozens of Americans died during the Iraq War, capturing that city. Iraqi security forces were last seen speeding out of Ramadi as ISIS took control, leaving behind a swelling humanitarian crisis as thousands were forced to flee amid the fighting. And that has drawn a scolding from Defense Secretary Ash Carter.
What apparently happened was that the Iraqi forces just showed no will to fight. They were not outnumbered. In fact, they vastly outnumbered the opposing force, and yet they failed to fight.
But in an interview with the BBC, Iraqi Prime Minister Haider Abadi insisted that Secretary Carter had it all wrong.
It makes my heart bleed because we lost Ramadi, but can I assure you we can bring it back soon.
The administration quickly moved to soften the sting of Carter's blunt assessment. In a readout of today's conversation between Vice President Joe Biden and Prime Minister Abadi, the White House said the Vice President recognized the enormous sacrifice and bravery of Iraqi forces over the past 18 months in Ramadi and elsewhere. But that's unlikely to silence critics on Capitol Hill, some of whom, like Arizona Senator John McCain, argued that without more American boots on the ground, the current strategy in Iraq is a losing one.
We need to have a robust strategy. We need more troops on the ground. We need forward air controllers. We're just referring to airstrikes. Do you know that 75% of those combat missions return to base without having fired a weapon?
Shannon, U.S. military officials tell us tonight Iraqi forces are massing a major counteroffensive to retake Ramadi. But given how long it took to take the much smaller Tikrit, we're told that this battle for Ramadi could take several weeks.
Yeah, we'll talk about that and also the Secretary of Defense's comments this weekend as well. Kevin Corke live at the White House. Thank you.
You bet.
Observances large and small are taking place all over the country on this Memorial Day. Correspondent Leland Vittert shows us some of the events right here in the nation's capital.
The Freedom Bell reverberated around the National Mall. Its ringing, straightening the backs of the assembled, all gathered with a common mission, but different reasons.
It's just a salute to my father.
For Mike Allred. He was killed in Iraq a couple years ago.
The bell is cast from iron, once part of the World Trade Center's girders, making it all the more symbolic for Army chaplain Joseph Brancatelli, who lost buddies in Afghanistan.
It represents in many ways how the Bell of Freedom has been told across our country.
America! At Arlington National Cemetery, for the most august of Memorial Day observances, the president echoed the same theme.
It's our duty, our eternal obligation to be there for them too. To make sure our troops always have what they need to carry out the mission. To make sure we care for all those who have served. To make sure we honor all those whom we have lost.
Some of those gathered at the Vietnam Memorial to see the new Medal of Honor stamp unveiled wanted the president's words to be true, but say the nation's promise to veterans living and dead has been broken.
I think he talks out of two sides of his mouth.
Ron Happel came back from 2 tours as a machine gunner in Vietnam suffering from PTSD and says the problem of poor treatment of vets hasn't been solved after all these decades.
These guys and gals who are going to Iraq and Afghanistan, 3, 4, 5, 6 tours, I can't say enough about them, and they're not being treated well at all.
Amid the choreographed pageantry of the Capitol's Memorial Day parade, Iraq vet turned pro wrestler Chris Melendez says he can live with his lost leg, but fellow wounded are getting lost in the VA's never-ending saga of poor care.
It should be a little bit easier to navigate, especially for soldiers who are returning with brain injuries, etc., who have a hard time just dealing with regular tasks.
As the sun sets on this Memorial Day, the flags on the National Mall are now at full staff. As the father of a fallen Marine told me, his son would want us to use this day to remember his sacrifice, but also, Shannon, celebrate the freedom we have because of it. Back to you.
Absolutely. That is the bottom line. Leland, thank you very much. Some unscheduled work today for American military pilots who escorted an Air France plane to New York's Kennedy Airport after a threat was made against the flight. The FBI says the jet scrambled after an anonymous caller claimed a chemical weapon was on board the aircraft. The plane landed safely. No weapon was found. A handful of other planes were also affected by threats. 2 of them were inspected and cleared at Newark Airport. Well, the big argument about some of the other methods the government uses to battle terrorism is not over this holiday weekend. The Senate took off for vacation without reauthorizing the Patriot Act. Tonight, Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel tells us what that means.
I ask the Senate now proceed to a bill to extend the expiring provisions until June the 8th, until June the 5th, until June the 3rd, until June the 2nd.
It was after 1 a.m. Saturday morning, and Majority Leader Mitch McConnell could not find a way to extend expiring provisions of the Patriot Act before senators left town for the Memorial Day holiday. Leading the charge against McConnell was fellow Kentucky Republican Senator Rand Paul, whom McConnell endorsed for president.
We have entered into a momentous debate. This is a debate about whether or not a warrant with a single name of a single company can be used to collect all the records, all of the phone records of all of the people in our country with a single warrant. Our forefathers would be aghast.
After the Senate fell short of 60 votes for the House-passed USA Freedom Act and McConnell's preference, a 2-month extension of the Patriot Act, he tried those shorter extensions to no avail.
My colleagues, do we really want this law to expire? We've got a week to discuss it. We'll have 1 day to do it. So we better be ready next Sunday afternoon to prevent the country from being endangered.
Maryland Democrat Barbara Mikulski, who stayed as home to NSA headquarters, expressed her frustration that the agency was being ripped for doing its job.
I worry about privacy, too, but I also worry about the safety and security of the United States of America, and I watched the nation vilify the men and women who work at this agency.
So McConnell will bring senators back on Sunday, just hours before bulk data collection and other protections stop.
I'm worried about it. We passed what I think is an imperfect bill out of the House, but it's better than letting it expire. Among the other provisions that expired are the lone wolf provisions, which are exactly the sort of threat we're going to see more of here at home.
Some key senators suggest McConnell will likely try more short-term extensions to avoid a lapse, hoping pressure will be much greater at the deadline. However, they note if Senator Paul keeps getting buzz for his presidential campaign by opposing the bills, a short stoppage in these programs may be inevitable. Shannon?
Could be a very interesting weekend.
Indeed.
All right, we know you're on it. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks.
Well, this Memorial Day, most major 2016 presidential candidates are taking a holiday from official campaigning. Tonight, a look at what Republicans are hoping to do to gain favor with a rapidly growing segment of the electorate. Here's senior national correspondent John Roberts.
Gracias a ustedes. Thank you.
You can expect to hear a lot more of that in the next 18 months as the Republican candidates attempt to recover from a disastrous performance among Hispanic voters in 2012.
People don't care what you know until they know that you care. And I don't think Republicans have done a good job of reaching out to Hispanics and letting them know that their support is important.
Hector Barreto helped lead George W. Bush's Hispanic outreach in 2004 when Bush collected 44% of the Hispanic vote. Barreto says the candidates need to be out in Hispanic communities now, building bridges, making the case that Republican policies are in lockstep with what they care about.
we've got a good bench this time. We've got a number of candidates that get it, that understand it. Some of them speak fluent Spanish.
One of those fluent candidates is Marco Rubio, the son of impoverished Cuban immigrants. Rubio's campaign won't give details about his outreach program, except to say his story and message has appeal across a number of voter groups. But Rubio is taking nothing for granted.
If you become the nominee, do you get instant buy-in from the Hispanic community?
No, you have to earn that. Just because my last name ends in a vowel doesn't guarantee me the vote of anyone.
Jeb Bush is probably the most aggressive in courting Latino voters. He recently appointed Jose Malaya campaign manager for Hispanic outreach and has a separate communication shop dedicated to Spanish-language media. He's making campaign stops in Hispanic neighborhoods and last month traveled to Puerto Rico. And as his brother did in 2004, Bush will have Spanish-speaking surrogates across the country to engage the community on a constant basis.
Por favor, disculpen mi español.
Rand Paul and Ted Cruz plan similar outreach. Cruz even has his Cuban-born father, Rafael, campaigning for him. Republicans insist their views on the economy, jobs, faith, and national security should naturally align with Hispanics, if they can get past the elephant in the room.
Very much aligned with the Republican Party, but I'm not going to vote for a party that I think is going to deport my grandmother.
Already, Hillary Clinton is making immigration a wedge issue, promising citizenship to illegal immigrants, even though the decision would be up to Congress and not her. Marco Rubio, who had to back off his plan for comprehensive immigration reform under pressure from conservatives, acknowledges some of the Republican rhetoric isn't helpful.
There might be an individual from time to time that says something that doesn't necessarily go well, but what it does is allow the left to exploit it. You know, what the left does is it goes to Hispanic voters and says, Republicans hate people like you.
Rubio was hoping to convince Hispanic voters that illegal immigration isn't good for anyone and that the first priority needs to be to secure the border. With a vigorous outreach to Latinos, Republican candidates are at least trying to get a foot in the door so they can have that conversation. Shannon?
Thank you, John. Up next on this Memorial Day, hunting for new ways to diagnose and treat PTS. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 5 in New York with the death of Nobel Prize-winning mathematician John Nash and his wife. Nash's battle with mental illness inspired the Academy Award-winning movie A Beautiful Mind. State police say Nash and his wife Alicia were thrown from a cab in which they were riding during a crash on the New Jersey Turnpike. Fox 7 in Austin, Texas, with 12 people reported missing in flash flooding from a line of storms that stretched from the Gulf of Mexico to the Great Lakes. Also today, a tornado raged through a city on the U.S.-Mexico border, killing at least 13 people. And this is a live look at Miami from WSVN. Big story there, a scary scene at a Fort Lauderdale beach as a water spout sent an inflatable bounce house flying into the sky. Authorities say 3 children were injured. It's not clear whether they were inside that bounce house or on the ground. That is tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back.